I teach here at GW. I'm an adjunct professor, but I always tell my students, whenever you have good guest speakers, take full advantage of them, because if you're running for a local office, oftentimes you can't always afford the great advice that you get from really good speakers. So while we've got speakers here that have run for office and who are office holders, take full advantage of them by asking all the questions that you've had and that you have been wanting to ask people who have been to the wars and who have been through the campaign battles. So let me start by turning it over to the mayor.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you all for having me here this morning. Thank you, staff, for the invitation. And it's great to be able to share with you all a little bit of any way that I can help out. That I sat in that seat a couple of years ago. At the time, I had no idea that I was going to actually end up using the knowledge that I gained for my own campaign. I just always kind of been a political junkie or a government nerd, as I describe myself. And I'll just start off with a quick story of how I ended up running for office. That when I was in terminal leave from active duty, that I had about 3 months build up and wanted to do something productive with that time. And I had been home for Easter and was reading about how my city was essentially bankrupt. And so it was Easter, I think it was middle April that year, and they weren't sure how they were going to continue to operate in the black past August. And I thought, what in the world has happened here? That you can't get China to buy up your debt for the city of LaPorte. You're going to bounce a check to a fireman. So what's the plan here for how we're going to fix this? And so I thought, well, I've got some time to be able to use as I see fit. Maybe I can help out, which led to that I wrote a series of articles in the newspaper after meeting with a number of officials and various folks that had been involved in the problem to explain what had happened, and then more importantly how the electorate could help fix the problem. Not from placing any blame on anyone, just this is the background so that you're educated on it and how it affects you and how you can move forward from here. That led to this discussion that I was running for office, or that I should run for office, all of which at that point I still found very, very funny because I was living in DC and was planning on staying in DC as a government junkie. And then a number of people kept talking about what was going on in the community, and I looked at what needed to happen, and I didn't see the changes that I saw fit happening. And so I thought, well, I've been blessed with some really great experiences through the military and this really great leadership that I've learned from, and some pretty unique experiences at the Pentagon and understanding the budget process and understanding making tough decisions and communicating. And I thought, well, if there's something that I can do for my hometown, then I should do that. What's the worst that can happen? If I run and lose, then at least I'll know that I did everything that I could to try and help out, and I'll sleep just fine at night. And lo and behold, went and campaigned for about a year, and I was still working in DC, and so I commuted for about a year from LaPorte, Indiana. That once a week I would fly out to DC and be in DC for about a day and a half or so, and then fly back to LaPorte and work from home for the company that I was working for out here, and then knock on doors for about a year. And I tried to explain what it is that I wanted to do for the community and why I thought I was the right person for them to vote for. And so that's, I guess, a quick version of how I ended up as the mayor of LaPorte, and I'll look forward to being able to share any kind of insights into the campaign process that went into that, and the strategy that we used, and the ideas that we put forward.
So I should apologize if I'm going to cough a lot, and it's not because I'm sick. This weekend is actually the 5th year anniversary of the day that the Taliban gave me a permanent injury. My lungs are scarred thanks to an RPG. So if I cough, it's not because I'm sick. It's just because I have bad lungs. Excuse me. All right. So how did I get here? Let's see. I was never supposed to be in the military. I was never going to run for office. I wanted to be a civil rights attorney. And I'm from New York, and you all obviously remember what happened on September 11th, and basically if my best friend Patrick was here, he'd tell you he left me alone in a mall for about 10 minutes to buy a present, and when he came back I had enlisted, and that's pretty much what happened. I enlisted in the infantry, much to the shock of all my friends, but my family is a long line of military service. My grandfather joined the Navy on December 8th, 1941, and I just couldn't stand the idea that I wasn't going to go and do my family and civic obligation. I very quickly realized being a private in the infantry is not fun. And so thankfully the Army afforded me the opportunity to eventually receive a commission. And I went off to grad school, and I was going to be, in the Army, and then I got recruited into the CIA. And moved down here, and my first day on the job at the CIA, I got recall orders to deploy to Afghanistan. And so 6 months later, I found myself on an embedded combat advisor team in Ghazni throughout 2008, which is actually the year that Afghanistan started becoming worse than Iraq. Statistically speaking, it was the most violent. It was actually more violent than Iraq in 2008, and it's only gotten worse since. And while I was there, my aunt and her members of the Daughters of the American Revolution had knitted these wool hats that they thought we needed. I don't know why, but they thought we needed wool hats. And they'd send them to us, and we didn't need them, so we'd give them out to these Afghan kids. And eventually the Afghan parents, like, hey, you're the guys who come and give us wool hats. We really like that. And we said, well, we don't like coming out to you so much, because every time we come out here, we get blown up. Hence why I'm coughing. And they said, well, what would keep you coming out here? I said, well, tell us when we're going to get blown up. And they said, okay, don't drive down that road. There's a bomb waiting for you. So these wool hats ended up saving my life and the lives of my guys. So when I got back from the war, I took a trip back home to upstate New York. I'm from Rochester, and if you've ever been up there, it's some of the most beautiful country in the United States. We have these wonderful lakes that run north-south called the Finger Lakes. And I went up and I gave a presentation to my aunt and her friends, and then I got in the car and I decided to take the scenic drive back along one of the shores of this lake called Canandaigua Lake. And if you've ever been up there, you're going south on Canandaigua Lake and you go to this small town called Naples. And Naples is, this is a quintessential small town in America. Okay, there's a main street, there's a high school, right? And there's a gas station and a hardware store and a locally owned supermarket and a couple of restaurants and maybe a hotel and so forth. And I'm driving through, and there's a hardware store called Johnson's Hardware, and I have NPR on. And I'm driving by I'm driving by Johnson's Hardware store, and there's a sign in the window that says, closing our doors after 80 years, 90% off of all inventory, everything must go. Now, this is the hardware store my granddad went to, my dad took me to, and I was going to growing up, so I was shocked. And I got out of the car and I stopped there and I saw the fourth generation of the Johnsons who owned the store. And I said, what's going on? And they said, we can't get it. Nobody's working. The economy's collapsed. None of the people doing construction are buying parts or anything for hardware. And so we don't have any customers. We went to the bank to get a small business loan just to keep us going through a tough time. First time we've ever needed to do it. And they turned us down. And I got back in the car and I had NPR on it and I was listening. They just, sheer serendipity, I guess. They had this... It was a hearing in the Senate, the Finance Committee, and some United States senators were asking some very simple questions to some Wall Street bankers, which is, we gave you $800 billion because you were supposed to lend it to the American people to keep small business afloat, yet you're not doing that. Why is that? And there were not a lot of good answers coming out. And finally, one of the senators said, I see here that your company gave over $100 billion in bonuses last year, coming from the American taxpayers' money. How do you explain that? And they hemmed and hawed, and finally one of the bankers said, well, I'm trying to retain talent. The same people who caused the entire collapse of the economy. And it made me enraged. I didn't go to war for that guy. I went to war with the Johnsons. So I got back home, down here to Washington. I was back at the CIA, and I had a really long day, and I walked out, and my best friend from high school and college had sent me a text message saying, call me immediately. And so I got in the car, and I called him up, and I said, what's going on? His name's Clark, and Clark said, our hometown congressman is going to resign due to a sex scandal. Nobody knows it yet. There's going to be a vacancy. Do you want to run? And I said, I don't know. Let's have dinner. And so I went to dinner. I had never run for anything in my life. So I thought it was going to be the West Wing. Like, I'd go out and give cool speeches, and there'd be like a Leo McGarry, kind of cheering me on, and I wouldn't, I'd have all these other people doing great things for me. And Clark's like, no, I'm going to lock you in a windowless room for about 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, and you're going to call complete strangers and beg them for money. And I might give you 30 minutes for lunch. Do you still want to do it? And I said, well, no. And he goes, well, at the end of it, you do get to be a United States, member of Congress. I said, okay. And he said, look, more to the point, we could do some great things, and people need to hear your ideas and from your generation and someone with your experience. And so I'm looking forward to your questions. I'll tell you, I thought being in the Army was hard. I thought being in Afghanistan was hard. Running for Congress was the most difficult thing I ever did in my life, but also the most rewarding. There's a lot of lessons I'm looking forward to sharing with you. I'll leave you with this one key piece of wisdom, which is don't hide behind your surface. Don't think you don't need to bring it up. I found that with folks, it actually gave me a distinctive competitive advantage, especially if you're running against somebody who's never served, because you can almost throw it in their face, and I would actually encourage you to do so. People have no concept of what it is that you went through being a veteran, but they want to. You know, see, we're all turtles in this room. So everybody in life is a duck or a turtle, right? Ducks are civilians. They quack, they're emotional, they're loud, they get freaked out by everything, and they have an opinion on everything, they want to share it with you. And we all used to be ducks, and then we all went to war and something happened, we all came back turtles. And we like to retreat in our shell, and we don't really like talking to other ducks. We like talking to other turtles because we all get each other. And we're calm and we're rational because things aren't blowing up around us. We understand what happens when that does. But the problem is that you got to learn how to talk duck again. And the way that you do it is by talking to ducks and sharing your story with them so that they can come to understand you. And that would be my encouragement to you, is talk about your service. What I just gave you, by the way, was my introduction speech on my campaign. That was the story of how I got here. Because I wanted to establish at the front that, okay, I didn't want to do this. I felt compelled to. I felt called to. And that's what you want to, and I have an idea of what it is that I want to change. I want to fix something. I want to right an egregious wrong. You can hone that story. And if there's one thing you take away, is you have to have something compelling, a hook, that keeps them interested. If you have that, hone it and make it personal, and then invite them to share their stories with you and try to find a commonality. You'll win. You'll beat all the odds. You really will.
I'm Simone Lightfoot. It's so good to be with you. I am going to cheat and deviate just a little bit. I'm going to give you a little bit about me, but I have so much I want to cover. I'm going to skip a lot about me. How I got here, very typical. Grew up in Detroit, Ann Arbor, Michigan area. Wanted to get away from my mom's rules. Couldn't wait to graduate high school. Walking downtown one day, saw the finest man I had ever seen in my life sitting in a recruiter's office with a uniform on, and I said, wow. I went in, talked to him, and came out in Air Force enlistee. And so that's how I joined. It fit the bill to leave home. It fit the bill to serve. Mom made us do that growing up, helping neighbors and doing things that we didn't understand at the time, so that wasn't new for me. And when I went into the military service, I was able to just cover all those ills, send money home, buy a car, travel, all those good things. Having gone in, though, I served under Daddy Bush the first time we went to the Middle East, Mr. Reagan, President Reagan, and then Daddy Bush. I served at Dover Air Force Base as air transportation. Mine was back during Prince William Sound, invasion of Panama. That was my era for some of you back then. I want to touch on a few things, and then you can just stop me when my time is up.
Feel free to take as much time as you want.
Oh, thank you. Okay. I want to talk to you about those of you that are wanting to run for office. And these are just some of the things that I've learned over the years. I've served as campaign manager for the mayor of Cincinnati, who's the first directly elected African-American mayor, Mark Mallory. He is the current mayor now. I served in that administration working with him on all his special initiatives. I've headed up campaigns in Detroit that were successful. Did Obama's Senate race when he was running for U.S. Senate for the NAACP, although we were nonpartisan. Our job was just to get out the vote in Illinois, and I led that effort, and we did. So, and it's like they skip dog catcher, they skip clerk, they skip city hall. Those are some of the elections where you have your best chances of winning. It just is. If you just look at the data, I'm not a big girl in emotion, so you gotta understand I'm a veteran. I just deal with what is. What is. And based on what is, the reality of you winning your first time out is little to none, no matter what office you run for. And so if you're talking about running and unseating an incumbent, that's a whole nother level, particularly at the congressional level, because you have so many other dynamics in play. Is that state a red state or a blue state or a marginal swing state? Will a whole lot of federal money come rolling into that state because they're one of the few 6, 8, 10 states in play? Or do they sort of leave you alone and there really isn't the resources floating into your state to trickle down into those particular races? So I just want to encourage you to consider starting a little different than where you may have thought you wanted to start. It's how you build your base. It's how you get a constituency that supports you as you ascend. And that's how you turn the $5 for dog catcher race into $2,500 for your congressional race. Time moves quickly. Sometimes people say, no, that takes too long. We have a sitting senator, he's been there forever. Well, scandal comes up all the time. Heart attacks, all kinds of things just happen in office that present themselves for you an opportunity. And so I just want to encourage you to consider something that would, for some may be considered a lesser race, but man, do you hone in your skills. Do you learn the way that things work? Consider the personal sacrifice that you're going to have to make for public office. I think veterans do well because we tend to have had to keep our nose clean throughout our military career. We couldn't really do the drug thing. We couldn't do a whole bunch of traffic tickets. We couldn't get caught up in a whole lot of scandal. So I think veterans' records tend to be a lot cleaner than non-veteran records that tend to run for office. But be prepared for the scrutiny that comes with that. The beauty about being a veteran is you're okay with scrutiny for the most part because you're constantly being scrutinized generally. You're constantly being evaluated. And that's how it is when you're running for public office. A little different in public office. In the military, we just cuss you out. If we don't like it, we just tell you we don't like it. And that's just how we talk. But in civilian life, you have to articulate yourself and use a different vernacular. And so you have to do a whole lot of mental calisthenics. So prepare yourself for that reality too. When you're sitting and you're listening to someone say to you, yes, but no. And you're going, what did he just say to me? I call it Romanese. It's a whole new language that they talk in politics, where you're sitting there and your head is spinning, and when they're done, you still don't know what they said. That's the problem. And I was so happy to hear the previous speaker talk about the public's desire for truth. It's so rare these days. When you hear it, it shocks you. When you hear somebody just tell the truth in public life, you go, whoa, that's different. And so I think he was right when he talked about veterans being able to do that uniquely. Really talk to your family about this thing. You know, we as veterans, our families catch heck when we deploy and we come home and you have the wife. I remember when I was at Dover, we had all these young guys. They were married, 18 years old, married their high school sweetheart. And she is just devastated because she's out in the sticks. Her mom and none of her family is around. He's out in the field all the time and she's stuck at home with this kid. So when he comes home from the field, she's complaining. She wants to go home. And so he's catching hell at work and at home too. Be really mindful about your spouses and your family and if they are really in this thing. It's hard and it's very tasking, particularly if you have children, to see mom and dad's name on blogs or in the news being picked apart. True or not, it's really difficult. When I was running for school board, someone had said, don't vote for Simone Lightfoot. That's all they said in the little comment. I was devastated. Oh my God, I can't believe somebody said that. And our daughter says, well, Mom, you said it shouldn't matter what people say about you. And I said, yeah, but now when they're talking about me, it's different when it's talking about you. So be prepared that when it's you, it stings. And your children tend to be a lot stronger than you may be. Developing that thick skin is so important, and that face that military bearing, we call it, when you're getting hit, and the camera's in your face and you're sitting there and they're just blasting you and you want to resort to very carnal approaches, like just bucking up and punching somebody, you have to figure out a way to come across as a leader. You have to figure out a way to come across as someone who can still handle the punches. I always liken it to a football player who wins a Super Bowl. You know, they run up to him and they say, champ, how does it feel to win the Super Bowl? And if all he tells you is how he got clipped and how somebody hit him and how somebody face masked him, you would look at him like, what the hell is wrong with you? That's what happens in football. So for you to, and that's how politics is. So when you sit and complain about how the media is not giving me, that's what the media does. They do what they do. And I think a true leader sucks it up, at least publicly. Now you get in your campaign huddle and you fuss about how the media is screwing you over. But that's nothing you do publicly. You don't let that. Remember Bill Clinton walking out to Air Force One when they were impeaching him, and it was him with the dog, Chelsea in the middle, and Hillary with her sunglasses on. And they were walking, and Bill was just walking with the dog, and you begin to ask him, do he know they impeached him? That's just how he kept his stuff. That's how you have to do it. Now, the reality of politics, though, is the cost. It's the cost. Because you have to do that so so much, you find Hennessy becomes your friend. And that's the danger, or beer, or some other outlet. It's almost like in war, because nobody really understands what you're going through. No, not, particularly even your family. So you have to be careful that you have those different outlets other than what we might traditionally talk about. Laughing at yourself is so important. Humility is so important, but it has to be balanced with leadership. You can't be combative all the time. You have to show some humility, but demonstrate you can laugh and that you're human and that you're normal and that that's okay. Say you don't know something, as our previous speaker talked about. That's important as well. And stop me. Make sure that when you talk about where you're running from, that matters. The challenge in a military person is because you're stationed in one place, but you're from another place, but your family is in another place, and you really have an affection for a whole other place, you got to figure out where the heck your base is going to be. So where can I go and run? And you have to know that when you get there, the first thing many people are going to say is, well, where have you been the last 15 years or 10 years? We don't know you. And so you want to figure out a way before you leave the military. I always tell people, start writing checks. A little $25 check to if you decide the town you're going to run in, she's running for mayor, send her a check. Hey, fellow veteran, here's $25 for your campaign. Start building your cadre of support. It can be across the country.
That's so true.
It is. And you start early. It's cheaper. Start when they're running for city council, $25. Hey.
And if you want to send me a check, please.
It's such a great point. I don't mean to jump in. My family in the district that I'm from has been there since 1790, and the other side tried to write me off as a carpetbagger. We've been there since 1790, and they tried to say that I wasn't from my home district. And when they asked, where have you been the last 10 years, I was like, I've been in the military. And that was it. It ended the conversation. I was off, defending the country. But
And to that, Mayor Milo, when you were coming back and forth from DC to LaPorte, did you ever hear any of that? You're not really from here. You're a DC person.
I did, and that and many other things.
Why in the world do you think you're qualified to do this? That I was 28 years old when I was elected, so what in the heck makes you qualified to be mayor of a city?
But I was actually chatting with some gentlemen at the break that talking about the veterans struggle with having that home base, having the location. If you decide that you want to go back home, for me, I went back to the place that I was born and raised, and it's a city of 22,000 people, so I do have an establishment there that a number of folks do recognize me, and I was able to say I was off serving in the military, and here's the skills that I gained in the military that I want to use towards improving LaPorte. And if you want to go back home, I think that's an easier sell to make. But if you don't, if that's not the right fit for you, find where is the right fit. And I don't think it should be based upon this is where I can get elected easiest. It should be based upon the number of different factors that go into making the decision on where you're going to decide to build your career and family. Whether it's you like the community feel, you like the people there, you like the natural resources that are around there, you like the business climate, communicate that, because that's what's going to resonate with those members of the community. They made that same decision to stay in that location. And if you can communicate that and then expound upon why you think this is a great thing and what you want to do to enhance those things for that location, I think that helps resonate.
I think for candidates of color, I agree with everything you guys said. Candidates of color is a different story. It's a different story. You have to consider that dynamic as a candidate of color. It does matter the demographic of an area you so decide, the socioeconomic conditions, how liberal or how conservative they are, how they think. All those things matter. Coming from Ann Arbor, Michigan, we're an education town. Education is what we do. We export education out of Ann Arbor. So to grow up there and to turn and say, I'm going to go to the military, that was a slap in the face. Because in that town, the military means, oh, you need discipline. You need structure. Oh, there's something wrong with you. You can't do it yourself. I see, so you're special. And so it's not, so it does matter in that sense where you're from or where you're going to settle, because they view military service differently in different places. Sometimes it's considered deficient. Sometimes it's considered a good thing. Also, when you're talking about the money flow and all of that, I'm with you. It shouldn't be necessarily why you settle in a place, but just know when you do decide to settle, as you start looking at the campaign finance reports coming out of that district, pull those, get online and look. I talked about sending checks back home to where you want to start building a base. Send out bids. You guys are traveling around the world. The perspective that's going on in your hometown that you want to talk about, lighting. Maybe there's a lighting issue like in Detroit. Talk about lighting in Kandahar. Talk about the issues over there, how those infrastructure needs were met, and translate how that would be done in your own hometown. And so if you're blogging, you're sending op-eds, you're sending perspective to the city council person who's in charge of utility affairs committee. He won't know you, but dang it, every time he opens his email, it's that political perspective from that military guy that keeps up with local issues. It's a way to keep your name out there. It's a way to continue to conversate and be in the mix politically at home or where you're going to run without physically being there. And it's also important to establish your intellect, your ability to discern, your ability to dissect. We in the military think strategically and tactically. Politics isn't a lot of that all the time for the greater good. It's generally done, as we talked about previously, for candidates around consultants. Strategy and tactics are important, but remember when you talk about duck and turtle, the language is different. Example, our superintendent just quit our school district. We were sitting at a meeting the other night, and we were on camera doing our vote about something, and she just slides her resignation over to the president. Then she quit. And so we're on camera, and the president sits, and she's like, okay. All right, how do I handle this? We had to think legally, because technically she couldn't alert all of us in one setting. We had to break off so that we weren't in a forum. No, what she said was, I'd like to take a 10-minute recess. And we're like, we're ready to get out of here. What are we recessing for? That's where you got to trust your leader. Might not know what the heck's going on in their head, but you know it's something. And you trust them. And so you agree, okay, well, we'll vote for a 10-minute recess. And then one by one you get called out in the hall and told, okay, this is the dynamic we're dealing with. Now we got to go back in front of the public knowing what we know and keeping our composure. But my point is you have to figure out a way to navigate and deal with how we deal with things differently. I, as a veteran, wanted to debrief. I wanted to say, what the heck happened? How did we get here? My colleagues did not want to do, no, let's just move forward. We never completed a mission like that in the military. There was no way we would just move forward. We would come back, we would say, who messed up? And if you messed up so bad, you had to go to the base hospital and drop urine. It had to be something in your system. That's how bad you messed up this mission. In public life, it is not that way. And so as a veteran, it's so hard for me to this day to struggle with how in public policy it's just to move forward, don't stop, keep going, and not an assessment of mistakes and an assessment of how things can be done better. So you have to figure out a way to get around rules. Rules and processes. We have on our school board, the way you get on the agenda is as 7 members, you can say, I was sharing this story, I want to talk about cups. Okay, we'll put cups on the agenda. I want to talk about microphones. Okay, we'll put microphones. Well, when you have folk that you don't like or people that are too outspoken, like those veteran people, we're going to change the rules of the way we set the agenda. Now you have to get 4 votes for anything to make the agenda, because that veteran person is always talking about what's fair and what's equitable, what's responsible. So you'll find yourselves getting shut out sometimes, and you have to figure out a way to get around that issue and keep moving. One thing about a military person, you might shut me out, but it don't mean I'm going away. I'm just going to find another door to come through or create my own. That's just the way it is. And you have to take those kind of characteristics to the political process too.
So I want to ask the panel, everybody on the panel, to talk a little bit about, once you've made the decision you're running for office, you picked the office that you're running for, how did you get your campaign off the ground? I oftentimes get asked this by my students is, I want to run, I've made this, I know what office I want to run for, but how do I actually get the whole thing off the ground, raising the early money, putting together supporters? Talk a little bit about how you did that. Once you decided to run for office, how that initial maybe 3 to 4 months, how did you get that early seed money? How did you start building your organization, and how did you get your campaign underway?
Router?
Well, I will say that I don't think that it's wise to just try and fund your own campaign, because ultimately when you're going to go out and make those fundraising calls, you're asking for an individual to invest in their future and in you as a candidate, and that helps with the full political momentum and the support that you're going to want to gain. It's not just about having money to communicate your message, it's also about getting that support from individuals to invest in their future. While you're going to do that, I do think that it's
important for a candidate to believe enough in their own candidacy to try and invest some of their own money. And I would recommend that you do it in the form of a loan to the campaign so that then you can make decisions further on down the line. It doesn't have to be a huge loan, but that is an easy way to start off your campaign. And then we put together that I did the announcement, and I'm from a community of 22,000 people, so we have some limited media resources, so went and reached out to all of the media resources that we had available, the radio station, newspaper, and I reached out to the regional newspaper, invited all those folks, got a number of supporters in town together to make the public announcement. But before I did that, I went to key members of the community that I know talk to a lot of people in the community. They're the guys that go and meet with other folks for coffee on Tuesday mornings, that they have dinner every Thursday with various other folks, that they're at strategic places all throughout the town to talk with them, ask them what some of their concerns were, to engage them in the process and explain why I was wanting to be involved and why I thought that I would be a good candidate for them to support, why they should want to vote for me and then ultimately financially support me as well. And that helps spread the word. I can't overemphasize the importance of that grassroots effort. I was able to unseat a 2-term incumbent, and this is the first time that I ever ran for office, and I'm 28 years old. But because you do the legwork, which as veterans you're used to doing the hard work, by going out there and knocking on doors, pounding the pavement, as Mr. Klein mentioned, that Bill Clinton shaking hands with everybody, that's going to be what makes the difference, by just going out and just start talking to people and ask questions of what their concerns are and explain to them what it is that you want to bring to the table and why should they support you, why should they vote for you. And I think that'll resonate.
Can I just ask, what was your total budget, your first race?
I ended up with about a $50,000 budget.
Okay.
All right, so mine's a little different. I'm gonna talk like this. My guy resigned. So the party, New York State is a very Byzantine law that basically stipulates in the resignation of a member of the House, a Senate, the governor can appoint someone, but in a House resignation, there has to be a special election, but they don't call it until the governor certifies that the seat is actually vacant. And at the time, New York State was bankrupt, so they couldn't afford to do a special election until the general election. But the way that they select the candidate is they don't actually have a primary. The county chairs from the Republican Party get together and they pick their candidate, and the county chairs from the Democratic Party get together and they pick their candidate. And so the Republicans had already coalesced around a guy named Tom Reed, who's now the actual member of Congress from the district. And the Democrats didn't know what they were going to do because it was the Democrat who had resigned. And so they were looking for, they were considering a dear friend of mine who's actually an heiress to a fortune. They were considering a couple other local elected state officials, and none of them were the right flavor. And so Clark's suggestion to me was, well, just start calling the county chairs, just cold call them and tell them who you are and why you want to do this. And we ran this insurgency where I would call up and say, hey, I'm Matt Zeller, and this is where I've been, and this is what I think I'd be able to do for you. And Clark would then call them up, because they all knew Clark because he was a political guy known to the district. And he said, you know, I've been thinking about a lot of this, and there's this Matt Zeller guy I think we ought to consider. And so we started sort of spreading this information campaign as to whether or not that I should really be taken seriously. And then they finally brought me in for an interview, and I wowed them, is what they tell me. So they selected me as their candidate, and the first thing that I will tell you, lesson learned here, if you're going to run for federal office, it typically takes 2 years, okay, to run a campaign, and realistically it'll take 4. And the reason why is your first campaign you'll likely lose, but you'll get your name recognition out there, and then you'll know what you need to do for the second campaign, and it'll be identified enough that within 4 years you get it. Now, the average congressional seat, and this is disgusting, on average costs $2.2 million to win. And the reason why for that is because of our ludicrous way that we have to use money to buy TV ads when you and I as taxpayers own the airwaves, but yet we have to buy it from the people we're currently renting it to through the FCC. It'd be like if I had the only car in town and I was renting it to Blair, and I decided I wanted to run against you for mayor. And I came to you and I said, hey, listen, I need the car for like 10 minutes a day, and you're renting it for $400, and she was like, yeah, sure, it'll cost you $1 million. I mean, that's our current system. So the first thing you should do, the only thing you should do once you decide you're going to run, is hire someone to help you raise money. Period. Don't hire a campaign manager, don't hire a PR person, don't hire any consultants, hire someone that's going to help you to raise money. And what they're going to tell you is you have to think of fundraising as a bullseye. The center of that bullseye is anyone who you can call right now and ask them for $500 to $1,000 to $2,500, whatever the federal campaign limit is. It's different if you run for state offices. There's really no limit to fundraising, but in federal office, there's a campaign finance limit. So start thinking about that list now. Family, friends, anyone that you can think of who you can guarantee will give you money right now. That's your center bullseye. That's where your seed money comes from. I actually would take a different approach. I wouldn't loan myself money. I didn't take a dime from the campaign. I didn't loan myself money because I didn't want people to think that this was something I was doing to try to enrich myself. And I also probably wouldn't qualify for a loan. The second circle, that bullseye, are, and you should be all taking down the names of every single person in this room, their email address and a phone number, because if you run, these are your peers. You might not be able to get them to donate to you simply because you called them up, but if you can talk to them for 2 or 3 minutes and explain why you're running and why they should support you, they're likely to give you money. That's your second circle, okay? And so every acquaintance in life, anyone you've ever come across, get contact information because you're going to be calling them at some point and asking them for money. Then there's the third circle, and this is the one that really sucks. These are complete strangers, and you're going to cold call them. And that's why you hire that finance director. Because that person is going to get a bunch of interns, and they're going to get on the internet, and they're going to start looking up all the people in the world who give to Democrats from New York, who are military veterans, who want to legalize marijuana or whatever, and pick your generic issue. It could be gay marriage, it could be abortion, it could be the war, Social Security, whatever. They're going to identify that person's niche issue, their average giving amount, they'll get all the contact info, and you get then a binder of these people, and you will sit there with those interns, and they'll be dialing and you'll be dialing, and whoever gets on that person on the phone first, you get there and you have about a 3-minute pitch. You have a script that you sort of memorize with an ask at the end of it, and that's call time. Now you raise that money, and what that money does is it pays for everything else. It pays for the campaign manager, the PR person, your field director. So in my campaign, I hired a finance director. I got that initial $30,000 from family and friends that I called for. Sarah hit the ground. We had $30,000. We then raised about $180,000 in the first quarter. I had 6 months to run. I raised $500,000 strictly from individuals. That's almost unheard of in a first-time candidate at the age of 28. I also, by the way, was supposed to lose by 30 to 40% in 2010 as a Democrat. I lost by 6% in a Republican district. The point of that is that I also just spoke the truth. What I would have done had I done it a second time and had 2 years, hire that finance director, work with that person. If you have a full-time job, it's going to be really hard to raise money. Running for office is almost a full-time job because you're calling people not when they're sitting down for dinner, but when they're on the job at their place of employment. And so it's very hard to raise money if you're at a full-time job, so think about that. But once you have enough money to pay for your staff, then the next thing you do is, and this is just my opinion, is hire a campaign manager. And then work with that campaign manager, then hire a field director, because field is what gets people out to actually get out and vote. And then the last piece of that is your media person, who's going to be getting your name in the press and doing daily press hits. And try to keep your staff, really try to keep these people, when you bring them on board, realize that personnel cost next to your media budget is going to be the most expensive thing in your campaign. And so the last thing you want to do is find yourself with you really don't need 40 people to run for Congress. You need about 4, and then a lot of dedicated volunteers and interns. I'll give this last piece of advice. Because I had never run before and I had no idea what I was doing, I went and found somebody who was local, who sort of, there's always that like one volunteer that sort of, if she or he can vouch for you, you're good with everybody else. Mine related is Donna McClain. She became our campaign mom. I had to convince Donna, basically. They said, if you can't convince Donna that you're the right guy for this, no one's going to back you. And so I sat down with Donna, and Donna, I talked for a little bit, and Donna finally said, all right, I'm yours. I will work with you. You need to find your Donna. Donna brought all of our volunteers. Because Donna vouched for me, I got into all the local committees. And that's the last piece of advice. Running, you have to say to yourself, I'm doing this for X. And for me, I was always, I'm doing this for the Johnsons. At the end of the day, I might hate this position, and I hopefully will never be compelled to vote on it. But if it gets me to the point where I can help out people like the Johnsons, then it's worth that stupid sacrifice. And maybe one day I can fix the system where we don't have to rely on money anymore. We can do what the Brits do, which is publicly fund all elections. So.
I think my races are not the best examples. I was appointed the first time and elected the second two, and although I've had opponents, I've never really had to do a lot of fundraising. Goodness, I'm not good at that for myself. But for other candidates, one of the things I want to touch on really quickly is with labor being under attack the way that it is, it's going to change the dynamics on the ground politically. In Democratic areas specifically, it was the post office workers who would show up Saturday morning in Cincinnati at our headquarters to help the mayor run for election. Those postal workers would come in and get our stacks of lit, and in an hour they were back. They covered their whole district, their whole area that we had assigned to them, because they do that every day. As a matter of fact, they come in and reconfigure our maps to let us know that these buildings are burnt out, they're no longer here, because again, they walk the streets every day. But when you look at the Postal Service under attack the way that it is, then that sort of thing trickles down on the ground. When you look at labor being under attack the way that it is, those are who did the phone banking in our cities. Those are the ones who had rooms like this full of labor folk Saturday and Sunday and after work calling people for a particular candidate. That's under attack. When you talk about the right to work states, so no longer is labor able to put money in campaigns and help get your lit out like they once did. So those are some of the dynamics going on politically that translate down on the ground for candidates. That's interesting. The Donnas of the world, excellent point. The Donnas of the world are the ones who raise the hell, and the Donnas of the world are the ones who the establishment don't want to piss off. They may not know you or care about you, but they know they've got to keep dealing with Donna as they have for years. And so as many Donnas as you can find as a new candidate, the better that you can. The military taught me many things. One important thing, I remember I used to work with a guy in Mississippi, big, tall, white guy, just loved him, and his name was Vaughn, V-A-U-G-H-N, and Vaughn was teaching me how to play pool at night in the barracks. When we were at work one day, the commander came down and gave us these directives, and we had to break up into teams. Vaughn was the leader of one team, and we had another. And it was like when you were in elementary school, you line up and you want your friends to pick you for the kickball. And so I'm standing there with the troops, and Vaughn is looking down and he's picking, and he's looking down and he's picking. And I'm standing there going, oh, I know he gonna pick me. That's my boy. We together every night. I know he gonna pick me. He didn't. And so I remember when I went up to him after it was over, our team went one way, they went another. I said, what's up? Why you ain't pick me? He said, the mission calls for this clearance. You don't have that. The mission calls for this training. You don't have that. The mission, so on and so forth. I learned at that moment at 19 years old, it was about the mission. It's not about the friendship or the person. He said, but I see you tonight back at the barracks. And so what I carried into life, and you touched on, you only need a good 4 or 5. You need the people that are the best qualified for the mission, whether you like them or not. Really, if they're a good fundraiser, but you find them to be quite curt and not the best that you want out in public dealing with people, well, keep them in the back room raising the money.
Yeah, I hated my finance director.
Yes, I mean, keep them in their lane. But don't get caught up in, oh, that's my boy, I need to bring him on to help me, because if he's not equipped to handle the mission, he won't do you the service that you need. I think campaign finance reports, you touched on that, it's all electronic now for the most part. When you're sitting, particularly as a candidate prior or before you're a candidate, you have a lot of time to research. Look at those campaign finance reports of those elected officials in the town or area you're going to run in, the state reps, the state senators. Which Democrats or Republicans in that area or independents or PACs or unions are funding these particular candidates? You want to just get a sense of that. You want to know who the players are. So when you're in a room and you hear that name of Donna, you go, oh, that's Donna, that's the crazy lady they said I need to get with. You want to know who the players are. And so make sure you're keeping up with that. And the best way, of course, is research. If you lose your first time out, which again I've stated is likely, do good. It leads to appointments. One thing I found when I ran against a 30-year incumbent. Thought I was going to win. Oh, the Lord had told me to run. I'm going to win this thing. And what I learned at the end was he did tell me to run. He didn't say I was going to win. I said I was going to win. See the difference? He said run. And so what I did, I ran, lost, went up to the State House, oh, your numbers are so great. My campaign manager was a former state rep. He introduced me to some legislators he knew. Oh, your numbers were great. You had 46% against a 30-year incumbent. I didn't care. All I knew was I lost. I didn't even understand percentages. I just knew I lost. That's a big deal to have numbers that high against a 30-year incumbent. That led to me going to the legislature and working on staff. It also led to the mayor of our town appointing me to the CDC committee, the commercial development, downtown development committee. It led to me being appointed to one of the NAACP's executive committees. It led to me being appointed to the homeless shelter in our town. So just because you lose the race, it doesn't mean that you're out of the running by any means. And of course, when you get those appointments, that's when you get to hang out with the mayors and you get to see the people and go to the political, and of course your political stock goes up. So make sure if you're not successful in your race, you're always positioning yourself for some other type of opportunities in the political process. You're likely to invest. We talked about not investing. Most people have to invest in themselves. Most. And I'm going to tell you what kills you. Them dang on yard signs are so expensive. So check out the prices.
Yard signs do not win elections.
That is so true.
No matter what a volunteer tells you, yard signs cannot vote. They just cost you money.
And a lot of seniors, what you find is a lot of senior citizens, we found, they don't know how to say no. A lot of them, well, that's back when they were opening their doors. It's a different dynamic out here when you're doing door-to-door now, because a lot of folk aren't really coming to the doors like they used to. They're not interested in that type of approach. But what we found is a lot of the seniors would say yes just because you were nice and you asked. I mean, they were going to vote for you. They just didn't know how to say no to you. So they say, yeah, go ahead. And then you lose that whole precinct. How the hell did I lose a precinct with all these yard signs? And so he's right, yard signs don't win. But visibility is important. And if you have limited numbers, make sure you're strategic in where you're placing them. If your city is a square and all your yard signs are in the center of the square as opposed to the outlying areas where the main drags are. So just be conscious and
Sorry, quick tip on that, on yard signs. If you do want to get more money out of people that you've already got from the past, and you can call them and they say, you know, I know you see my yard signs out, we're running out of them right now, and we need to raise about $5,000 by the end of the week to buy more. Can you help me out? People give for that in like a heartbeat. That's where yard signs are helpful.
I want to jump in here real quick. We have about a half hour left, and I want to save time for all of your questions. I did want to ask, every one of you on this panel are pretty young, and I especially want to hear from the mayor who won at 28 years old, which I think is amazing. When you run as a younger candidate, you almost always get the pushback from somebody, either party leadership or other elected officials. You're too young, you've never held public office, or have been. How did you overcome that?
Well, that actually became the perfect question along the campaign trail. That I mean, folks would say, "Are you even old enough to vote? I mean, what in the world are you doing?" And I would say, "Well, yes, I can vote and have voted, and here's what I've done," and talked a little bit about my career in the military. You know, I've served in leadership positions since I was commissioned as an officer in the United States Navy. And I've led, my first division was a division of 25 sailors, sonar technicians and torpedo men, and then I led a division of 6 electricians mates, where I had to learn the job of how to track submarines and provide electricity to a ship with my degree in political science. So I learned how to problem solve, and then I spent a year in Bahrain living on an oil platform with Iraqis and understood working with different cultures and people with different backgrounds in order to be able to come to a common mission and work with one another. And then I spent 2 years at the Pentagon, and I understood budgets and being able to say, I'm not your average 28-year-old, and this is the experience that I bring to the table. And then I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time on that because they'll be interested in it, but they're going to think, what's that mean to me? What's it going to...
Experience with working with a first-time candidate, either going up in an open seat or against an incumbent. And if they can't point to success that way, don't hire them. There are a lot of people who are really good at fundraising with incumbents, and the reason why they're good at fundraising with incumbents is that most people, when a member of Congress or the mayor or whoever calls up, they're going to be more likely to give than if you, some random candidate they've never heard of, is calling up and asking for money. And there's a lot of people who are finance directors who've made their reputation on the ability to raise money, but they're not actually doing that. It's that elected official already has a network they're tapping into, and this person's just taking credit for that. And if you feel, hey, yeah, that makes sense, and you got a good rapport with them, recognize that you're going to come to hate them, because they're going to be the person who tells you that when you want to call your wife or your kids or your husband and you just want to take 5 minutes and a break, they're going to say, get back on the phone. You're running for office. My salary, the salary of your staff depends on you making money, and if you want to get elected, you're going to have to go out and buy TV ads to get back on the phone, and you're going to be like, all I want to do is eat a sandwich. Get back on the phone.
What are you looking for in a PR person?
Relationships with the local media, and that's the papers, the radio stations, the TV stations. You also then want to find someone who's done political campaign work before, because what you'll find out is that you think interviews are you being honest and off the cuff, and you can do that with a reporter, and you might think that you've given the greatest, most honest interview that you just wish every candidate had read, would have gotten access to and been there for. And what they'll write is the story that they wanted to tell in the first place that touches nothing on like your most ingenious Nobel laureate points. So when you do these interviews, you want someone who's going to basically be able to anticipate what a reporter is going to ask you, and then you're going to feed them canned language that you want to get into the press, because you want your constituents to see that you have this value, this value. So the first thing, if your PR person doesn't tell you to answer the question you wanted to be asked as opposed to what was asked, you're not hiring the right person. And make sure that they understand the importance of social media. Facebook, Twitter, blogging. It is the way that a lot of voters now feel that they can interact with their candidates and their elected representatives. And if they're not on that every single day, a couple times a day, updating content, they're not, and especially with YouTube, I had literally an intern that followed me around and filmed everything that we put all up on YouTube. They're not doing their job.
I want to add on to that too, that with any of your campaign staff, you want to have someone that's going to get your district, whatever your district is. And whether that's because they come from there or they're that savvy with whatever their area of expertise is, it's important for them to understand the nuances and different dynamics that come with your district, so that they can appropriately advise you on the public relations aspect of things, of how this is going to be interpreted by the public in general.
I think you want someone with relationships and that's respected. You touched on this. You don't want a person who doesn't know the same people you don't know. They need to have more cell phone numbers in their cell phone than you have in yours as it relates to the media and the people that needs to be communicated with. So relationships, and access. You need someone who's respected enough that, as you said, when you call the local news, generally they may say no, but oh, it's you, Simone, okay, I'll come over. Just because of the relationship that'll be there long after the candidates are there. I think organizing the blogosphere is important. Having a cadre of folk that your media person can help you keep engaged in the blogosphere. We're automatically responding, talking about how they support this candidate.
Do not name your committee. I named mine Zeller for Congress. Stupid. You want to name it Friends of Matt Zeller, because let's say you want to one day run for Senate. You can't transfer the money from Zeller for Congress to Friends of Matt Zeller. So always name your committee Friends of whoever you are. Because that way, if you say it for the office, it becomes a lot harder. Why was Zeller for Congress now supporting Zeller for Senate or Zeller for President, right? It's Friends of Matt, whoever you are.
I think I want to touch on the web piece. This goes, you're right. I think you're right. Overall, you're right. But where there's a difference is it depends. I just ran a race. I was the manager of a race for Charter Commission. We did not have a website at all, period. I did the numbers. The voters in that district overwhelmingly didn't have internet service at home. They overwhelmingly had access to the internet at work. Unemployment was high, so a lot of people weren't even going to work. And the voter turnout was mostly seniors in the primary. So hard. A lot of folks like to stay out of the primary. And you running against another Democrat or Republican is where you really want to get the money and the help. And that's where the establishment says, oh no, sorry, once you make it through the primary. Well, the reality is on the ground most times, once you make it through the primary, that is the race in many instances. So there are still those little times where you can get away without the website type approach or without the online approach, because these particular voters were seniors as well, and they did just what you said. They wrote checks. They don't do internet. They don't do fax. They don't even want you to talk to them about it. And that's why you have to know and respect the constituency that you're working in.
Matt, what are you doing now to lay the groundwork for the next campaign?
I didn't hear the question.
I said, what is he doing now to lay the groundwork for his next campaign?
So, last year was the worst year of my life, to get really personal. My wife and I are going through a divorce. I got laid off due to sequestration last July. And so I just now finally got a job with Deloitte. I was asked to run in 2012, but my now ex-wife at the time was pregnant with our first kid. And so I said, thanks, but no thanks, I'm not missing the birth of my child. And I was asked to run this time around, and I thought long and hard about it. But given the fact that I'm going through a divorce at the moment, it's probably not the right time. I really need to focus on solidifying my relationship with my soon-to-be ex-wife and also being the father of my daughter. That being said, 2016 is what I'm considering next. And so what I do is this. At the end of your I have a 40,000 person database of people who gave me money. And so I keep that current. And what I do is I loan it to the current candidate on the promise that they give it back to me at the end of the campaign with all the updated contact information, which is my way of staying current and making sure that I don't have to do research later going forward because I have all these people's new phone numbers and emails. I then try to stay involved in the media. Like I'm a regular commentator in like the Huffington Post and MSNBC, so I try to stay relevant that way. But what I do is I call the county chairs and I ask, how can I help the current candidate? Is there anything I can do? I'll do an endorsement. I'll go and do an event. And so can Congressman Steve Israel, who's the chairman of the Deep Triple C. If you can get them to back you, they'll call Soros, this guy who gives money. And it's not just Soros who gives, it's all of the Soros family. So there's like $100,000 that comes from getting the Soros endorsement. And so if you maintain a really good relationship with the National Party and they know that you're still interested and it's just not the right time in your life and that you're thinking of doing it later, like I just had a meeting with a D-Trip last month and they're like, okay, we'd really like you to do this again. And I was like, you know, it's just not the right time. But they approached me and it was only because I continue to help out as I can. So just stay relevant. Yeah.
And they will begin to approach you. I mean, that's just the way it works. They'll come to you as long as you stay in the game.
It doesn't sound like any of you have ever gone through a primary challenge. So,
I did.
Did you? And getting money, because you're not getting, you know, national level interest typically until you're the nominee, which leverages into my question about the fundraising piece. So it's so key, so you can prove that you're a legitimate, you know, candidate. Did any of you have experience with using your like a network of networks where you had family and close friends that you immediately called would chip in, and would they, not spam, but would they reach out for you? Did you get seed money?
That's your second ask after they write you a check, is then you say, okay, now that you've written it to me, can you call all the family members that I can't remember and ask them to do the same thing? And then you can actually set up an ActBlue page where it's just like they can send it, it's just, you know, say like family, you know, contributions or whatever. But yeah, that's the second thing you ask for.
I think it depends too, back again on where you're running. When you look at communities of color, for instance, money is not the first thing that they're willing to write you a check for. They will vote for you. They'll take you to their churches. They will talk about you and cuss anybody out who talks against you. But writing a check, well, what do you need all that for if I'm doing I'm doing all this other stuff for you. You have to be mindful of that. They're not going to call grandma because grandma's on a fixed income. But grandma will tell the church pastor to let you come and speak in front of the church next Sunday. I mean, so there's trade-offs where you don't have the financial resources coming in that you have to manipulate as well.
Your network of networks is a good description because that's your bread and butter. That's where you're going to have to live for in any number of different ways, whether it's financially or just getting votes, whether it's getting the information out through the churches. And I think that that's an important piece to capture because in understanding your district, that whether it's through the churches or we had a group of folks would come into the Republican headquarters and a group of retirees that would sit and write out handwritten letters to be able to send out to their friends because you're more likely to open up a handwritten letter. And they would write out, hey, here's why I'm supporting Blair Milo and why I think you should too. And they would ask them to come in, bring in the addresses of 10 of their friends, and then ask them to ask those 10 people to tell 10 of their friends. And that's how you just keep spreading the word.
It also matters too what level you're running for, because sometimes if you go and you run for Senate or Congress, even your own family will say, well, what the heck are you starting up there for?
And then you start getting involved in it, and sometimes you do have a bunch of hillbillies that get involved in local government, but it doesn't make the decisions that less important. And so that's why it's so important to have people with qualifications to get involved at a local level. And there are times that I work with some of the city council members, and don't tell them this, but there are times that I think, are the inmates running the asylum here? What in the world, where are you coming from? Because they don't necessarily have a background. They're good intentioned people, they just don't necessarily have a background in thinking about policy. So the fact that you're here today says that you're already somebody that's willing to do some due diligence on issues, and it's so important to get that at a local level. You may think that maybe you're just spending time spinning your wheels until you're able to get to the next level, but it's so rewarding that I go into the office probably 9 days out of 10 happy to start the day because I enjoy my job. I enjoy getting to go and see the difference that I get to make for the people in my community. That it matters to them that the trash gets picked up. It matters to them that the streets are being paved, that they have water at their house, that they have wastewater, and the sewer is being taken away. And we're doing a lot of things with, we've expanded a tax increment finance district because of the work that we're doing with economic development in our industry, or in our area, and bringing in rail service. And understanding those kinds of dynamics are so important at the local level. But you're less apt to get folks with the qualifications to get involved because you may think it's a bunch of hillbillies that are getting involved with all of these things. And it makes such a difference and is so enjoyable and can be helpful for whatever it is that you want to do further along down the line.
So I know like city council, but like there's probably positions lower than even city council that we could run for, that we could do public service and be involved in the community, network with people before we run for city council, that we don't have to raise a bunch of money for, but we still have an opportunity to invest in our communities.
Precinct delegate is first.
What is it?
Precinct delegate. Precinct delegate, that's through one of the parties. You'd have to declare which party you're going to be a part of. But that's basically your neighborhood. You're the person they elect for their neighborhood to go to the party system and advocate for that. So that's I think generally all you have to do is be 18 years old and you can run for that. So that's very local. But then there's drain commissioner, depending on your area. They have a large water, we have a lot of watersheds and those type of things in the Ann Arbor area. We actually have a drain commissioner whose job it is to monitor and take care of the drainage system in our community. School board, of course, is always one. And I was joking about dog catcher, but there are, you have to look in wherever it is that you're going to run and see the different levels of office that they offer. Some things may be deductive reasoning if you don't see it flat out, but yeah, I should ask you that. Where are you from?
Well, I was speaking to the mayor earlier about community being like a homeless community. We talk about like homeless party,
Where do you want to go?
Well, I'm from South Carolina, but I've got my undergraduate in New York City. I lived in Las Vegas, Missouri. So I'm not exactly sure. I'm in DC now.
Whatever party you want to run for, be a Republican or Democrat, okay? Because the one thing that both parties agree on is keeping it to a two-party system. Whatever party you pick, get involved locally on the races. Then you'll start figuring out what races are available. You also meet the people that you're going to need to have their support to run for those offices. But I would go and just walk into whatever party headquarters that you want to make a local committee and say, hi, my name is so-and-so, and I'd like to volunteer. I'll do phone banking, I'll go knock on doors, I hand out literature, whatever. And then you start finding out, what races are available, and you start talking about your experience a little bit, and you maybe express an interest that you want to run for town board or whatever. And they say, hey, you know what, we don't have anybody who wants to do that. You said you want to do it? Great. You're our guy. Go forth and do great things.
Well, and depending upon where you decide you want to get involved, if it's a smaller community, there are a lot of positions you can be appointed to, and boards that they'll take. If I had people beating down my door volunteering for appointments, I would love it. But I'm usually having to seek people out to go and sit on different boards. There are different boards that you wield a potential amount of power. But there are boards that have budgeting powers for that specific group, and you can learn a heck of a lot about what's going on.
And you can do that before you run. I would suggest that if someone gets out of the military and go to their place and They're there for a year or so till they get there. I would immediately get with the mayor's team. They usually have task force on everything from roads to lights to you name it. And so you get that list of sort of what they offer.
As far as running as a candidate of color, and also in running for a mayorship, how do you address like the changing demographic, the global demographics of the place? So I left, come back 10 years later, and the landscape's different, to say the least.
Well,
I would be a candidate of color, but not my color anymore. So,
Things are changing. The white folks are voting for black folks these days.
it's difficult that when I moved back to LaPorte, there's not a whole lot of people like me around LaPorte. At least there weren't when I moved back. That there aren't a whole lot of opportunities for younger folks to be there. And so all the people that I went to high school with have scattered. And so that can make it challenging for relocating someplace, because then you're starting over fresh. My discussion with the public was, I want to help provide for the opportunity for other folks like me to be able to come back. LaPorte is a great place to live, work, and do business, to raise a family. And now I've had the opportunity to see a lot of places all over the world, to know that LaPorte's a great opportunity. And more people would love to be able to have that opportunity, but what are they going to do? And so that was some of my ability to sell what it is I wanted to do for the community, that I want more people like me to have that opportunity, that they aren't here because there are challenges. And don't you want your kids and grandkids to be able to stay here or come back here?
I think it's important to recognize the reality. You're going to have to work harder, period. Just you are. There's a difference when you're a candidate with dreadlocks versus an afro versus a perm. It's the difference. It's the difference if you wear black, blue, brown, and taupe, or if you got a lot of bling bling and you like red. I mean, all of that stuff matters given the constituency that you have to go before. But I think in the end, it's really about having a grasp of the issues, being able to overcome a name like Obama and get selected anyway, articulate, demonstrate your commitment to work. May not be easy. You might have to go a couple times around before you're embraced that third time. It's nothing new. It won't be anything new for you. It's nothing you haven't done before. But just because the demographics have changed doesn't mean that the voting blocks have. Sometimes you have a whole lot of new folk, but they haven't registered to vote, and they definitely don't participate in primaries. And it depends on whether you're in a primary race or not. And be comfortable with race, and understand that other people aren't as much. And that's where I think a little humor comes in, and just the way you manage it. But don't pretend like it doesn't exist, because that's disingenuous. When you think about it, I had some contrast here between white and black and lady. When you're a white candidate, a black candidate, and a lady candidate, even as a woman, you get resentment from your family. Well, you're not being a good mother. You're always out there. What about your kids? That's the big question. How can you be a good mother? And voters will say, well, do you have kids? And you say, well, yes. Well, where are they? You're like, I'm talking to you about policy. My kids are fine. I mean, so they never ask the men that, though. The old school practitioners, it's very fair point. Well, yeah, I mean, they get on you. They want to know about the feedings and all of that, but always traveling is always the issue. So even as a woman, you have those dynamics. But when you talk about the contrast in black and white, just a couple things. In the white community, oftentimes, like, they'll look at politics as public service. In the African American community, you're a celebrity. It's the difference. So in the white community, they will come and say, well, why did you vote that way on X, Y, and Z? In the black community, they'll say, hey, come on in, Congressman, sit down, come up front. Different kind of receptivity that goes on, different kind of accountability being held. In the Caucasian community, you have to articulate and have the vernacular. But in the black community, if you can swing it a little bit, then we think something a little wrong with you, something off. You too far over here, then too. So you have to have that balance.
They are millionaires.
Oh yeah.
They have a lot of money.
Yes.
And so what do you recommend for those of us who are not millionaires? What type of educational background that gives you more of an inroad? Is it public policy? Is it law? What is it?
I have $100,000 in student loan debt. A lot of people of my generation resonates with that. In fact, that's how I got college kids to vote for me, is I talked about the fact that this is our generation's problem. And I apologize to those of you who are a little bit older than me, but you need to be concerned about this because my generation's not getting married or having kids, and you need us to have kids so that you have Social Security. And the reason we're not doing it is we can't afford to because our college was so much more expensive than yours. And we're actually defaulting more than that on credit card debt. So when I point out my level of debt, I would then point out that, did you know that the average net worth of a member of Congress is $3.3 million? $3.3 million. I don't know a lot of millionaires, but I gotta figure that they probably don't have a lot in common with me and you. Make it a negative issue. I mean, success is wonderful in business, but it's almost a negative in politics. A lot of people, Romney didn't want to release his tax records for the few reason that he's a billionaire. I mean, yeah. The only way, however, we're going to fix this is if we absolutely remove just the fundamental need to raise money to put on TV ads, and that's why so many millionaires get elected, is they can dip into their personal fortune when fundraising is not working out so well, and use their personal fortunes to pay for those TV ads. I will give you, however, an example of somebody who didn't have a personal fortune and win. Kathy Hochul ran against it was New York 25, I don't know what it is now. But Kathy Hochul ran for a vacancy seat in New York in 2011. And she ran against a millionaires. This woman had $176 million of personal fortune to spend and spent about 30 of it. Kathy raised about $500,000 and won. And the reason why she was able to do it was because she was able to find an issue, one issue. It happened to be the Ryan budget, and she ran in a very Republican district, but it was senior citizens. And even though they voted Republican, they all wanted Medicare. And the Ryan budget got rid of Medicare as they knew it. And all she had to say is, if you vote for her, she might agree with you on everything else. She's going to make sure you don't have Medicare. And that got her elected to Congress. So find that issue that you can get that gives you the advantage over their personal fortune. And for you guys, I think it's being veterans. By quick show of hands, how many people here are members of the VFW and the American Legion? It should be every single person in this room, because they will not invite, you cannot go and give them political talks, but as a member, they can't deny you from walking into the lodge or the post and having a couple of beers with people and just talking about the fact and mention, hey, I'm running for office. Veterans will be your greatest support, and it's your advantage. Non-veterans can't touch them. It doesn't matter. We're all vets. Party doesn't matter to us. We support each other. So there's going to be a lot of people out there who will just simply vote for you because you know that you served. And that's another way that you can overcome that financial advantage.
So we'll get 1% of the vote, right?
No, because here's the thing. It's 1% now, but think about all those Vietnam draftees. Think about all those Korean War vets, those World War II vets that are still alive. Senior citizens vote.
Coming from active duty and going straight into the political field and sort of picking a district versus staying put, getting a real job.
I was basically, the CIA can pull you out of active duty and claim you. That's exactly what they did to me. It essentially was like going from active duty to going and running for office. So the first thing you have to realize is in the military, you're not allowed to take a political position. So you have to be off active duty before you can even be thinking about getting to run for office. It's always easier to run from where you come from, even if you haven't been there in 20 years, because you at some point were there and from there, and people might remember your family. But I would say that the hardest thing is making that transition from the military lifestyle of your team is just going to be there with you till 3 in the morning, because that's what you do to get the job done. I'll give you a personal example of what I mean by that. My campaign almost failed. About August of 2010, we were basically almost out of money. And it's because our first finance director wasn't doing her job. She basically just stopped working. And she eventually left. And we went through 1 or 2 other finance directors before we settled on one that we actually ended up loving and got along with great. But we hired a guy to come up to fix the campaign. And I had this idea where it was just, I thought, okay, the team's going to stick around past 5 o'clock. And the dedicated ones do, but not everyone does. If my people were doing it, I was doing it with them. I would never ask them to do something that I wasn't willing to do personally. So use that military leadership to bring on your support, but also recognize that it's not just going to be there. It's not just expected of the team because you're all in together. You have to show them that you really believe in yourself and that they therefore can believe in you. Tim Walz, if you all run for federal level office, you all call it Congressman Tim Walz from Minnesota. He is a retired sergeant major. He's the only enlisted member of Congress. And he was a high school history teacher. And the reason why he ran for office is because he took his history students to see both a Kerry rally and a Bush rally. And they went to the Kerry rally first, and they all got buttons, and they went to the Bush rally, even though they weren't political, they just wanted to go and attend the rally. The Bush people kicked them out because they thought they were Kerry supporters. And it pissed him off so much he ran for office. And now he's one of the best advocates for veterans in the military. He beat a Republican incumbent in a heavily Republican seat. He has held on to it since. He's one of the best members of Congress. But he's a teacher. So he approaches everything with the mindset of a teacher. How does he inform his constituents to go along with him? How does he win them over? How does he educate them to be better citizens? And he also is a lifelong learner. He's constantly learning. I think teachers make the best candidates, but that's just me.
I think lifelong learning is important as well. I have not completed my undergraduate. I continue to want to, but I keep getting really great jobs and opportunities. And it's difficult to go back. And at this age, at 46, I'm going, okay, I need to save this money for our 15 and 11-year-old daughter's college. So while I'm an advocate of education, I sit on the school board. I have yet to complete mine. So it's still possible, irrespective of your background academically or not.
There's an old joke that was, in America, any man or woman can become president. That's the problem. And I think that it is helpful to have some sort of educational background in policy, whether that's going the legal route or going public policy. I think it gives you a leg up. Is it going to be what wins a race for you and makes you the best legislator? Not at all. There's so many different factors that come into play for what makes a good elected official that I think that there's any number of different things that play a role there. But I think that doing a policy background of some sort does help give you a leg up.
Not being real smart, but I'm talking myself. Your rhetoric, your speech, it's obvious. Transitioning from active duty or getting out of the military, it's a whole different way of talking, a whole different mindset. Now, I know knowing the issues is one thing, but being able to translate that is another. What helped you guys strengthen your rhetoric as far as how you approached your subject matter with your people? Knowing your audience, knowing the tone, I get that, but not everybody can put that one from here to here. How did you guys develop that? What helped you?
Walk around, be comfortable with people. I'm a New Yorker, so I constantly talk with my hands, so I guess it came natural. But if you can loosen up the shoulders a little bit, you know, unbutton the tie a little bit, maybe even not wear a tie. People are going to expect you to be very military and professional because they're going to find, you know, oh, he's a veteran, he must, and they'll respect that. But they want to be able to feel that you're approachable and that you're comfortable and you're warm, right? I mean, Joe said it best earlier. Bill Clinton is the greatest president in American history for one reason only, and that's aerobic listening. If you've ever met the guy, you can be in a room with 50,000 people and it feels like he's just talking to you. And you're the only person that matters in the whole thing. That's the type that you want to, if you can get it to that, you'll be president of the United States. But you want to get it to the point where you're not just talking to the audience, but you're at one point talking to a specific person in the audience, making eye contact, constantly making sure you're engaging with them. That's not something we're taught to do in the military. You know, you're giving your brief to the commander, right? It's just the commander, the hell of the rest of the staff, he'll take care of it. Everyone in the room is a commander. You got to make sure you win every single commander's approval.
How do you get the point as far as the strength of your rhetoric to your issues? I mean, every issue is important to everybody, especially that person asking that question. Maybe you don't have, like John McCain didn't know everything and he said, hey, I can look that up. We go in there not knowing every single issue, how it's important, every single one, but that one person with that one question could put you back on your heels. How did you guys develop that? How did you guys develop to answer things like that, to kind of just really think on your feet differently than what we're used to, instead of, you know, directing, like you said, platoons and stuff? How did you work on that part?
Just ask them what their opinion is. Somebody says really informed on an issue that is kind of obscure and it puts you back on your feet and say, well, you know what? Do what McCain did. Be like, yeah, that's really interesting. Can you tell me more about that? Let me understand where you're coming from here. Let them do some of the talking. They'll calm down because it's the first time probably in all of it. They're used to going to a meeting where they give the issue and they get shut down. They move on to the next person. If you're the first person who says, I'd like to know more, and you engage with them for 5-10 minutes, might bore the rest of the audience, that person's going to become your greatest advocate because you're the first person who listened to them.
Be an active report, which they don't necessarily pay attention to the policy issues of DC. And I had just spent 2.5 years at the Pentagon talking about POMS and the Quadrennial Defense Review, and understood this whole other language. And every week I was having to switch back and forth. It takes time, and it takes making the conscious effort, and it's going to be hard at first. But once you you get into the habit of it, then it's not as hard. I think if you're in the town hall setting, take a moment before you answer the question, think about it, think about how what you say is going to maybe be interpreted by the individual that asks the question, and think about the style that they ask the question in, and then once you're making that conscious effort, it'll become more routine for you. It's harder at first, but after you do it for a while, just like anything else, then it'll become easier.
And if you don't know something, you can state that, and then you focus on what you do know. You might not know all of what they're asking, but the part that you do know, you can talk about that while enlisting their perspective. I pray, though, a lot, because I curse. I'm a big cusser. And so I have to, I know.
It's so hard.
It is.
I'm an infantry guy, and I'd always drop that bombs. My staff would go, no.
Yeah. I was an Air Force girl, but we cursed too. And so I struggle with that. In Detroit, I can get away with that. In Ann Arbor, I have to come up with a different type of conversation. But they're right, it just, you practice, you flub, and you hang in there. People know your heart, and they tend to help sort of defend against the media coming at you. Did you hear what she said? You have to tough through those. Listen, just shut up. In the military, it's so different because you're expected to have an answer, get them out there and get it done. In politics, I have found, just shut up. I found also there's power in going last. In the military, it's very much go first. You give the order, you get it. There's so much power in shutting up and letting the other two people speak. Fully be done when they're talking. Let them interrupt you.
All right, that we're going to wrap up. A round of applause for our panel.